So we have an update on the Kari Lake legal challenge to the 2022 election. She's still appealing. She lost at the first level, as I suspected. I put a video out like hours before the judge rendered his final decision on that trial. He of course said, hey, everything was good and fine. This was the most secure election in American history, and even if it wasn't secure, well, nobody did anything wrong on purpose, and so we're not gonna look any deeper into this. And the Lake folks filed their appeal, and I've read I didn't read the whole appeal. Frankly, I'm not a lawyer, so I think that a lot of it, even if I read the whole thing cover to cover, I would need somebody else to understand it for the most part anyway. So I read a thread from someone else breaking down the appeal, so I think I get the gist of what's going on here. I'll link to that thread, and they also have a link to the appeal itself if you want to read the whole thing. So the Lake folks, they point out that they have no burden to prove that there was any kind of election fraud or something like that. You don't try and prove that in a court. There's no reason to, because the laws in most states, and apparently this is the case also in Arizona, just say that you have to prove that there is some kind of uncertainty surrounding the vote count and the ballots that were cast and counted that is sufficient to bring the results of the overall election into question. And I've explained this many times going back to 2020, but for those of you who are not aware, let's say you've got an election where there is a vote margin of 20,000 votes. And let's say that there are 10,000 ballots that are questionable, that either they weren't handled properly, or maybe they were cast and they didn't have like a proper signature match or something like that, or the ballots were printed on the wrong sheet of paper, and so they had to be essentially redone by election employees, and then they lost the original ballots, and they only have the ones that they wrote themselves and then ran through the machine, as is the case apparently in Arizona, because you had people who were filling out ballots that then couldn't be read by the machine, and so the election poll workers said, "We'll just leave your ballot, we'll fill out another one for you." And that will be read by the machine, and then we'll run that through the machine. And now they're saying they can't find the originals that they supposedly copied faithfully, so you have no idea. They could have written on those new ballots whatever they wanted. And there's a bunch of just little things like this. And then, of course, we all know the long lines, the machines that were not working, and the amount of people who essentially had to be turned away because they couldn't stand there for 8 hours all day, and also the people who couldn't vote because the polling places closed at, I think, 7 p.m. Local time, and a judge on election day refused to extend the hours, so anyone who was in line just had to go home. Or rather, I think maybe if you were in line they would take you, but no new people could come. Or I can't remember how it worked. But there were people who were not allowed to vote because of that. They have a whole laundry list of things, because that's what you want to do in a court case like this. You just want to throw whatever you can at it, and any of these issues really, I forget which one in particular. There was just one of the points that they brought up would call 25,000 ballots into question. And the margin of victory here was only about 17,000. So really any of these things, if they won on any of these points in the court, and the judge said, yeah, that's a little suspect, well, then the final election results would be brought into question. And for the purposes of the law, it doesn't matter whether these votes, that are called into question are votes that would have been or were cast for Kari Lake or for Katie Hobbs or anybody else. That is not how the laws are written. So in essence, the law kind of assumes that whatever the ballots that are in question, theoretically, for the sake of argument, went in favor of the loser. Could the loser have won? That's the standard that you're looking at. Because the laws are written in order to uphold the highest standard possible. And so you want to be as sympathetic in terms of how the law is written to the loser as possible. Now, the way the judge, and I would assume every other judge, enforces this is, not in that spirit. They basically say, hey, sure, yeah, maybe you raise some concerns, but doesn't matter. Because you see, if I ruled that there was a problem with this election, well, then people, they would start to doubt that our elections are well run and well organized and fair. And so I can't rule that there was anything unfair about this election, you see, because then the pores might wake up and realize that democracy is a sham. And that's why, I do wish the Lake folks the best of luck in their appeal, just like I wish them the best of luck in their initial lawsuit. I really do think that Kari Lake is being genuine when she says, I didn't want to have to do this. This isn't fun, because it wouldn't be fun, because you're going to lose. But if you just, sit down and take it, you're just giving up. And, you are essentially acknowledging that they didn't do anything wrong. So you want to have yourself on the record saying, hey, here's what happened. This isn't crazy. These are facts. These are real issues, and the court just chooses to ignore them. Because this is not kooky, Hugo Chavez hacked the voting machine conspiracy theories. This is very real things that we watched on the news unfold in real time on election day. My video on election day was talking about how the Arizona election was being screwed up and how there were people being disenfranchised. We saw it on the day of the election before we knew the results. I think my thumbnail said something like "prepare to be fortified," or maybe that was the day before. And then But that's what I talked about on election day. We all saw it happen, and the Lake folks have amassed a case to support that. Then they also talk about matters like chain of custody, because of course the proper forms aren't filled out, and we don't know where certain ballots went, and there's all these missing ballots. And then they also talk about I think the 25,000 number that they mentioned were ballots that showed up between November 9th and November 10th. And those ballots, they're saying, I think, don't have any chain of custody, and so nobody knows where they came from. They could have just been printed out of thin air. They could have just went down to the Federal Reserve Bank of Phoenix, which, by the way, there's no Federal Reserve Bank of Phoenix, but bear with me, and said, hey, can you ask Chairman Powell if we can borrow your printing press for today? We don't, instead of printing, billions and billions of dollars, we would like you to print us a few thousand votes. I'm not saying that happened to YouTube, by the way. I think that this was the most fair election in American history, believe me. But what the Lake folks are saying is that, hey, if you don't have proper chain of custody, you could have just gone down and done that, because we don't know where these ballots came from. And all these things bring into question more than 17,000 votes. The number of questionable ballots, even leaving aside the ballots that were in theory suppressed, because you can't really quantify that. You can't quantify that, the election staff just really happened to be slacking off on their job and not doing a good job on the day when all the Republicans were voting, but they did a great job on all the days when the Democrats were voting. That is harder to quantify, even though I think that probably had a bigger impact, if anything, on the results of the election. So again, if you're a big fan of Kari Lake or something, don't get your hopes up. She's not winning this. This is not about winning. This is just about getting on the record, and continuing to appeal up the legal system. And this just shows how, let's say, unobjective our courts are. The courts exist as a part of the regime. If you go to the court and you say, hey, the regime did something really wrong here, and the regime is corrupt, or something to that extent, the courts will get defensive, because you're personally attacking them as well. If you're saying that the regime is illegitimate, then that's like saying that they're illegitimate too. And so what is their reflex? The reflex of the courts is to say you're a bad person for asking this. You're wrong. It's not true. It's all lies. And the regime is more legitimate than ever. So that's what you're asking, because if you go in with that mentality, you're not going to be surprised or disappointed when you lose. You're going into the regime and telling them to their faces, hey, I see what you're doing. You're not going to get a positive response when you do that. You shouldn't expect it. Judges are just as bad as any other unelected bureaucrat. And no, that's not true for every judge, but not every single person who works for the government is a bad person either. It's just that those sorts of positions, they tend to favor bad people. Bad people do better in government than they do in the private sector. There's also a lot of really bad people in the private sector. And then you've got people who are in between, who are part of the revolving door, who go back and forth between corporate captured government agencies and government captured corporations. So there's a lot of nuance in the world, but we as humans, we recognize patterns. That's our strength. That's where stereotypes come from. And as my old Spanish teacher used to say, stereotypes exist because they're usually true, or else they wouldn't exist. That's where stereotypes come from. So, I'd like to have some big New Year's special, maybe. A year in review thing. Maybe I'll try and think of something up tomorrow. But today, you're not getting that. At least not for me. Personally, I think I'm going to probably end up listening to Mr. Medicare's New Year's stream. I didn't listen to his Christmas stream, which I regret. But this should be good. This should be a whole year in review of the year of the Chud. So I'm going to look forward to that. And I'm certainly not going out drinking tonight. One, because I don't like to die on the roads on New Year's, and two, I don't drink. I'm not like I'm not like a recovering alcoholic where I can't have any alcohol. I cook with alcohol and usually don't cook it all out. But that's about the most that I'm gonna get to drink. I put liquor in my ice cream because it helps it freeze better, without crystallizing. So, but that's not enough to get a buzz. It is kind of boozy. I mean, you wouldn't want to give the ice cream I make to a kid, but not getting drunk. And it's not how I like to spend my days off. So with that said, I hope you folks all stay safe, and I'll see you back here tomorrow, hopefully.